I never expected a life where my dating history would be a complete disaster. But somehow, living with 3 men whose combined charm could stop traffic was the universe's way of punishing me. Or maybe it was just testing my patience and my sanity. The morning they all admitted they wanted more than friendship, I had just spilled coffee on my shirt. Perfect timing, really. I had moved to Chicago just after graduating college, armed with a liberal arts degree that had earned me exactly $0 so far and a dream that seemed to shrink with every rent notice. The apartment I found was modest at best. 2 bedrooms, a tiny living room that doubled as a dining area, and a kitchen that would embarrass most fast food diners. But it came with 3 roommates, and frankly, I didn't mind. Ethan was the first I met, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, clearly judging my moving in skills or lack thereof. He was tall, with dark, slicked-back hair, piercing eyes that could read your soul in 3 seconds flat, and a presence that screamed both authority and danger. Ethan was the kind of guy who looked like he stepped out of a magazine, even when he wore a wrinkled hoodie and paint-splattered jeans. Then there was Mason, soft-spoken, easy to laugh, with warm brown eyes and the kind of smile that made you forget your own problems for a while. He had this gentle way of being everywhere at once. His laughter could fill the apartment without ever feeling loud. Mason had a way of leaning against your shoulder in passing, and I couldn't tell if it was habit, comfort, or something more. And finally, there was Luke, mischievous, unpredictable, with messy hair and a boyish grin that seemed permanently fixed to his face. Luke had this way of teasing you right when your patience was running thin, and somehow you'd end up laughing at him even when you wanted to yell. At first, our arrangement was simple. Rent was split evenly, chores were negotiated with the kind of awkward politeness that comes from living with strangers, and our nights were filled with shared TV shows, pizza, and discussions about whether New York was better than Chicago. It wasn't. But beneath the surface, something was simmering. Maybe it was the long evenings where Ethan would stand too close while washing dishes, or the way Mason's hand lingered on my shoulder when he passed behind me in the hallway, or Luke's teasing that always felt just a touch too intimate. I didn't know what it was at first, and honestly, I tried not to think about it. The first real crack in our comfortable facade happened on a rainy Tuesday. I had just returned from work, soaked and miserable, when I found Luke sprawled on the couch, playing video games. I shook off the rain and reached for a towel, and before I knew it, he had grabbed my hand and pulled me down beside him. "You always look like you need rescue," he said, his grin teasing but softer than usual. "I just got wet in the rain, Luke." "I'm fine," I said, trying to wriggle free, but he held on, fingers brushing mine. His eyes were different that day, vulnerable, almost pleading, and I hated how my chest reacted to it. Ethan appeared behind us, and for a split second, I thought he'd scold Luke or pull me away. Instead, he just watched, leaning against the doorway, one eyebrow raised. "You're letting him get away with that again?" he asked, his voice calm but loaded. There was something in the way he said it that made my stomach twist. Mason walked in next, carrying a mug of coffee and looking at the scene as if he'd just discovered a treasure. He smiled softly, leaning closer. "It's kind of cute, don't you think?" His voice was gentle, almost conspiratorial, and I could feel warmth radiating off him, the kind that made you want to lean in. It was at that moment, soaked in rain, surrounded by 3 men whose attention I had never imagined focusing on me in this way, that I realized my carefully constructed walls were already crumbling. And then, Luke said something that made my heart stop. "You know, it's not just fun teasing you," he said, eyes locked on mine. "I kind of want more." I choked on my own thoughts, unsure how to respond. Mason laughed softly, brushing past Ethan, and Ethan just stepped closer, his presence undeniable. "You're not the only one," Ethan said, low and deliberate. I sat there, coffee forgotten, heart racing like a runaway train, as the apartment became a strange mix of ordinary living and unspoken confessions. I had spent months wondering if I could handle roommates who were, well, irresistible, and now here we were, all the lines blurred, every glance loaded with possibility, and my carefully organized life in chaos. It wasn't simple. It wasn't easy. Each of them wanted something different, and I couldn't even figure out what I wanted. Ethan demanded attention without asking, Mason comforted me in ways that felt too personal, and Luke teased me with dangerous sweetness. And somehow, amidst all this tension, the apartment no longer felt small. It felt alive, electric with desire, friendship, and the risk of heartbreak. The days blurred together after that. Mornings were a dance of stolen touches and lingering glances. Afternoons filled with laughter and arguments that ended in more laughter, and nights. Nights were a puzzle I didn't know how to solve. We tried to maintain normalcy, cleaning, cooking, binge-watching shows, but the undercurrent was always there, pulling us closer, daring us to cross a line that none of us admitted we wanted to. One evening, Ethan and I ended up in the kitchen, both of us reaching for the same glass. Our hands touched, and the air between us seemed to ignite. "You're impossible," Ethan said, and I couldn't tell if it was frustration or longing. "You started it," I muttered, heart hammering. And just like that, the dam broke. For the first time, we let our desires speak, and it was terrifying and exhilarating. Mason's soft voice whispered behind us, I think we all feel it." And Luke's laugh, sharp and mischievous, filled the space as he leaned against the doorway, watching us, daring us to acknowledge what we had all known for weeks. It was messy, it was complicated, but it was also the most honest I had ever felt in my life. And as I looked around that small, cluttered apartment, at the three men who had become my entire world in ways I hadn't expected, I realized something important. Love didn't have rules. It didn't have limits. It was chaotic, beautiful, and utterly human. The night we all finally admitted what had been simmering beneath the surface, the apartment felt different, like the air itself had shifted, heavy with desire and uncertainty. I was lying on the couch, heart still hammering from Ethan's touch earlier, when Mason quietly sat beside me, his hand brushing against mine, deliberate yet gentle. "I wasn't sure you'd notice," he said softly, voice tinged with something like relief. Us noticing each other." I swallowed, trying to form words that wouldn't betray how dizzy I felt. I noticed. All of you. I didn't know how to handle it." Mason smiled faintly, leaning just slightly against my shoulder. The warmth of him there was intoxicating. And somehow, in that small gesture, I realized how much I had come to depend on this closeness, this almost imperceptible comfort we gave each other. Luke appeared then, leaning lazily against the doorway with that mischievous grin I simultaneously loved and hated. "Looks like everyone's being honest tonight," he said, voice teasing but with a softness that undercut it. "Finally." "You're impossible," I muttered, but there was no bite in my tone. "Not tonight." Ethan's presence was magnetic as ever. He leaned against the opposite wall, arms crossed, but his eyes never left me. "I don't think you understand," he said quietly, the edge of command in his tone softened by something I couldn't name. "I've wanted this, wanted you, for months. And now, I'm not willing to wait anymore." My chest tightened, each heartbeat loud in the quiet apartment. The realization that all three of them had the same desire, the same complicated, undeniable attraction was overwhelming. I don't know what to do," I admitted, voice small. "I've never been in anything like this." Luke's laugh, low and teasing, broke the tension. "That's why it's exciting," he said, stepping closer. So close I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Because you're scared. And you should be. But you're also curious, aren't you?" I couldn't answer. The truth was that I was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Living with them had been a roller coaster already, but now the stakes were real. Each of them had revealed their intentions, their desires, and I had to figure out how or if I could navigate this tangled web. The days that followed were a mixture of ordinary domestic life and extraordinary tension. We cooked meals together, shared laundry duty, and sometimes just sat in silence, letting the unspoken feelings hang in the air. Every glance, every brush of a hand, carried weight. Every joke, every teasing comment, felt like a calculated risk. Ethan was the hardest to read. He was direct, sometimes almost harsh, but the intensity in his gaze told me he felt everything deeply. Mason was the opposite. Calm, reassuring, the kind of person who made you forget your own anxieties for a while. Luke, of course, existed somewhere in between, playful, unpredictable, always keeping me guessing. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Mason. He was chopping vegetables for dinner, and I watched him from across the counter, mesmerized by the way his hands moved, the quiet concentration on his face. "You've been staring," Mason said, without looking up. His voice was teasing, but the softness in it betrayed concern. "I wasn't," I mumbled, cheeks warming. "Don't lie to me," he said, setting down the knife. He walked closer, just enough that our shoulders brushed. "I know you better than you think." Something in that moment shifted. I felt the tension I had been carrying for weeks melt slightly. Mason's calm presence was grounding, a safe harbor amidst the storm of feelings. I reached out, almost unconsciously, and touched his hand. His fingers entwined with mine, warm and steady. "You're different," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I like different," he replied, a small, genuine smile spreading across his face. Meanwhile, Ethan's dominance in subtle ways never wavered. One evening, we were watching a movie, and I felt his hand brush against mine. I froze, my heart hammering, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he let his fingers linger, pressing lightly against mine. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. His gaze was intense, almost predatory, but in a way that made my chest tighten in anticipation rather than fear. Luke, of course, had his own methods. He would appear suddenly, leaning on door frames or corners, whispering things meant to tease, to provoke, to test boundaries. "You're thinking about him again," he'd say, nodding toward Ethan or Mason. And when I tried to deny it, he would smirk knowingly, as if he had been inside my head the whole time. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. I was constantly navigating my feelings, trying to understand my own desires while acknowledging theirs. Every meal, every shared laugh, every quiet evening at home was loaded with tension. Yet it also carried moments of tenderness I had never imagined experiencing. One rainy evening, Ethan and I found ourselves on the balcony, watching the city lights reflect on the wet streets below. The rain created a rhythmic pattern, tapping against the glass doors behind us. Ethan's hand brushed mine, deliberate but gentle, and I felt a shiver run through me. "I can't stop thinking about it," he said quietly, voice low and vulnerable for the first time. "About us. About you. I struggled to find words. "I feel the same, but it's all so much." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's okay. We'll take it slow. But I can't hide it anymore. Not from you, not from anyone." That night, as we returned inside, we found Mason leaning against the doorway of the living room, a quiet, expectant look on his face. Luke was sprawled on the couch, smirking like he knew exactly what was about to happen. The apartment, once ordinary and mundane, had become a stage for emotions too large to contain. The next days were a delicate dance. Ethan's intensity, Mason's warmth, and Luke's playful teasing formed a complex dynamic that kept me constantly on edge. Every touch, every glance, every whispered word carried meaning. I was learning to read them, to understand the nuances of their desires, and in doing so, I was discovering parts of myself I had never known. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the apartment, I found myself alone with Luke. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching me with a mixture of amusement and something deeper. "You're thinking about him," he said, voice teasing but soft. "Don't try to deny it." "I'm not," I replied, though my heart betrayed me. "You are," he said, stepping closer. "And you don't even realize it." There was a tension in the air that hadn't existed before. Luke's proximity, the warmth of his body, the mischief in his eyes was all overwhelming. And yet, in that moment, I realized how much I valued his presence, his laughter, his unpredictability. It wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about connection, about understanding, about the fragile, complicated beauty of loving more than one person at once. And as I stood there, heart racing, I knew that this was just the beginning. The apartment, once a place of mundane living, had transformed into a crucible of emotions. We were testing boundaries, exploring desires, and discovering truths about ourselves. Every day brought new challenges, new moments of tenderness, and new opportunities for heartbreaker happiness. And through it all, I realized something important. Love wasn't simple. It wasn't neat or tidy. It was messy, complicated, and often overwhelming. But it was also the most profound, exhilarating experience I had ever known. As I sat there, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few weeks, I understood that I was living a life I had never imagined. With Ethan, Mason, and Luke, every day was a balance between chaos and intimacy, tension and tenderness. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. I had found a family, a connection, and a love that defied conventions, expectations, and even my own fears. The tension in the apartment had become palpable. Every glance, every brush of hands, every word was loaded with unspoken meaning. I could feel it in the way Ethan's gaze lingered just a little too long, the way Mason's smiles carried a softness that tugged at my heart, and the way Luke's teasing seemed to probe deeper than it should. Living with them had become a delicate balancing act, and I was beginning to realize how precarious it was. One evening, the four of us ended up in the living room after dinner. The rain had returned, drumming steadily against the windows, and the city lights reflected in the puddles on the street below. Ethan was sprawled on the couch. Mason sat cross-legged on the floor with his head resting against the coffee table, and Luke leaned against the doorway, smirking knowingly at me. I felt the weight of their attention like a tangible force pressing against my chest. So, Luke began, voice casual but sharp. Are we just going to pretend none of this is happening? I looked around the room, suddenly aware of how absurdly tense everything felt. I don't know, I admitted, my voice small. I'm trying to figure out what this all means. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was a softness there, too. It means what we said, he said quietly. We all want you, more than friends, more than roommates. You just have to decide what you want to. Mason's hand brushed mine again, tentative and gentle, and I felt a warmth spread through me. It doesn't have to be rushed, he said softly. We can figure this out together. Luke, of course, wasn't content to let the moment breathe. He stepped closer, leaning over the back of the couch and whispered, or we can skip the figuring and just see where this goes. I laughed nervously, heart hammering. The truth was, I had no idea what I wanted. Not really. I cared about all three of them in ways that went beyond friendship. But the thought of navigating desire with three people at once, all with their own personalities, their own needs, it was overwhelming. And yet, the pull was undeniable. Ethan's intensity, Mason's warmth, Luke's playful unpredictability, it was like being caught in a current too strong to resist. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Every routine task, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, became an opportunity for tension, for proximity, for stolen touches. Ethan had a way of being near me that was impossible to ignore, his presence demanding attention. Mason was my refuge, grounding me when everything else felt too chaotic. Luke was the spark, the unpredictable element that kept me constantly on edge. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the living room. Ethan was there, sitting on the couch, staring at the rain-streaked windows. Couldn't sleep either? I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer immediately. Then he gestured for me to sit beside him. I'm thinking, he said finally, voice low and deliberate. Thinking about us, about you. I can't stop. I swallowed hard, sitting down. I feel the same, I admitted. But it's so complicated. He turned to look at me, eyes intense. I know, but I want to try. I want us to try. Together. The vulnerability in his tone made my chest tighten. I reached for his hand, tentatively, and he responded immediately, gripping mine with a warmth that grounded me. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could navigate this chaos. Meanwhile, Mason had his own quiet moments of intimacy. One afternoon, we were cooking together, and I accidentally cut my finger. He was immediately at my side, gently cleaning the wound and holding my hand in his, murmuring softly. The tenderness in his touch, the concern in his eyes made my heart ache in a way I hadn't expected. "I've never felt this before," I whispered, voice trembling. "You're not alone," he said, softly, pressing a gentle kiss to the back of my hand. "We'll figure it out together." Luke, true to form, was always watching, always teasing, always testing boundaries. One evening, he cornered me in the kitchen, grinning devilishly. "You're thinking about them," he said, his voice playful but sharp. "Don't try to deny it." "I'm not," I replied, though my pulse betrayed me. "You are," he insisted, stepping closer. "And you like it. Admit it." I laughed nervously, heart racing. "Maybe I do." He smirked, satisfied, and leaned in, brushing his lips against my cheek. The contact was fleeting, teasing, but it sent shivers down my spine. I realized then that Luke's presence, his unpredictability, was as essential to me as the others. He challenged me, pushed me, made me confront feelings I had tried to suppress. The next week was a delicate dance of emotions. We negotiated boundaries, tested limits, and explored feelings in a way that was both exhilarating and exhausting. Each of them brought something different to my life: Ethan with his intensity, Mason with his tenderness, Luke with his playful energy, and I found myself falling deeper into this complicated, beautiful arrangement. One rainy afternoon, the four of us ended up in the living room together, the atmosphere electric with unspoken desire. Ethan sat on the couch, Mason curled up beside him, and Luke sprawled on the floor with that mischievous grin. I stood in the doorway, heart racing, unsure how to approach the situation. "Come on," Luke said, patting the floor beside him. "We're all here. Might as well stop pretending this isn't happening." I took a deep breath and sat down, feeling the warmth of their presence envelop me. Ethan reached out, taking my hand in his, while Mason rested his head against my shoulder. Luke leaned over, brushing his arm against mine. It was chaotic, intimate, overwhelming, and perfect. For the first time, I allowed myself to surrender to the moment, to feel the love, desire, and connection that had been simmering beneath the surface. It was messy, complicated, and exhilarating. And as I looked at the three men who had become my world, I realized something profound. Love didn't have to be simple to be real. That night we talked, laughed, and shared confessions long into the early hours. We navigated jealousy, insecurities, and fears, but also celebrated the tenderness, passion, and trust we were building. The apartment, once just a place to live, had become a sanctuary, a space where love, in all its messy, complicated glory, could thrive. Ethan pulled me close at one point, his lips brushing my temple. "You're mine," he whispered, not possessively, but with a certainty that made my heart ache. Mason smiled softly, pressing his forehead to mine. "We all are," he said. Luke, grinning, leaned against the back of the couch. "And you're stuck with us, whether you like it or not." I laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that felt foreign but freeing. I was surrounded by love, desire, and friendship in a combination I had never imagined. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. I had found a family, a home, and a love that transcended convention, expectation, and fear. As the night wore on, I lay between them, warmth radiating from every side, heart full, mind racing. I realized then that happiness wasn't about clarity or simplicity. It was about connection, vulnerability, and the courage to embrace the messiness of life. In that small, cluttered apartment in Chicago, I had found something extraordinary. Love, in all its forms, was chaotic, demanding, unpredictable, and utterly beautiful. And as I drifted into sleep, surrounded by the three men who had stolen my heart, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, intense, messy, loving, and unstoppable. Morning sunlight poured through the half-open blinds, casting golden stripes across the apartment. The rain from the previous night had stopped, leaving the city sparkling, wet streets reflecting the pale light of dawn. I woke to the soft hum of the heater, the apartment quiet except for the gentle breathing of 3 people who had become my world. Ethan was the first to stir. He rolled over, dark hair falling into his eyes, and looked at me with that piercing intensity that had always both terrified and thrilled me. "Morning," he murmured, voice low, rough around the edges from sleep. I smiled, heart already warming. "Morning." Mason stirred next, stretching lazily before turning his head to rest against my shoulder. His smile was soft, unassuming, but it carried a depth of feeling that words could never fully capture. "Didn't mean to wake anyone," he whispered. "You didn't," I said softly. "I like it like this." Luke was last, rolling onto his side to face me. That mischievous grin, still present even in sleepiness, made my chest ache. "We make a great morning team," he said, teasing but with warmth beneath the jest. And in that small, cluttered apartment, surrounded by the 3 men who had changed my life in every imaginable way, I realized something important. We were more than just roommates or friends. We were a unit, bound together by love, trust, and the willingness to be vulnerable. The days that followed were transformative. We began to navigate our feelings more openly, learning the nuances of each other's needs, desires, and insecurities. Ethan remained intense, but he tempered his dominance with tenderness. Mason provided the constant, quiet reassurance that grounded me when life felt overwhelming. Luke continued to push boundaries, but his teasing was now a source of joy rather than anxiety. One evening, we sat together on the couch, the city skyline twinkling through the window. The conversation drifted from mundane topics: work, groceries, TV shows to more intimate revelations. "I've never felt like this before," I admitted, voice shaking slightly. "Not with anyone." Ethan's hand found mine, gripping it with certainty. "Neither have I," he said. "But I know I want this with all of you." Mason leaned closer, resting his head against my shoulder. "Me too," he said softly. "I want us to figure it out together. No pretending, no hiding." Luke smirked, leaning over the back of the couch, but there was softness in his eyes. "We're in this for the long haul, whether you're ready or not," he said. And I realized I didn't want to resist anymore. The fear, the uncertainty, the constant balancing act, all of it was part of what made this love real, messy, and extraordinary. We began to establish a rhythm. Mornings were filled with laughter over burnt toast and spilled coffee. Afternoons included long walks in the city, hand in hand, sharing stories and dreams. Evenings were a mix of playful teasing, heartfelt conversations, and quiet moments of intimacy that made the apartment feel alive with love. There were challenges, of course. Jealousy flared occasionally, insecurities surfaced, and communication sometimes faltered. But instead of letting these moments drive us apart, we confronted them together. We learned to listen, to apologize, to reassure one another. And in doing so, our bonds deepened, strengthened by the shared vulnerability. One night, during a particularly quiet evening, I found myself sitting between Ethan and Mason on the couch, Luke leaning against my back. The city outside was silent, the hum of distant traffic the only sound. I closed my eyes, taking in the warmth, the security, the undeniable love that surrounded me. "You're all incredible," I said softly. "I don't know how I got so lucky." Ethan pressed a kiss to my temple. "We're the lucky ones," he said, voice low. Mason smiled, pressing his forehead to mine. "We all are," he said. Luke, of course, had to add his own touch of mischief. "And don't forget Yuri stuck with us," he said, grinning. But the affection in his tone was unmistakable. The months passed, and life settled into a new kind of normalcy. We continued our routines, but everything was imbued with a sense of connection that made ordinary tasks extraordinary. Grocery shopping became an adventure, cooking together a source of laughter and flirtation, and even doing laundry carried the warmth of shared domestic intimacy. Our love extended beyond the apartment walls. We supported one another through work stress, family pressures, and personal challenges. We faced the world together, a unit that defied societal expectations and norms, yet thrived in the authenticity of our bond. One particularly cold evening, we found ourselves on the balcony, watching the city lights sparkle against the darkened sky. Ethan wrapped an arm around my shoulders, Mason held my hand, and Luke rested his head against my back. The silence between us was comfortable, filled with shared understanding and trust. "I never imagined this," I said quietly, "that I could feel this, happy, this complete." "You deserve it," Ethan said, voice low but firm. "We all do, and we'll keep fighting for it together." Mason squeezed my hand gently. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it's ours, and that's enough." Luke's grin softened, a rare moment of seriousness in his playful demeanor. "We'll make it work," he said. "All four of us. Messy, complicated, beautiful." And I knew he was right. Love wasn't about simplicity or perfection. It was about commitment, vulnerability, and the courage to embrace the chaos together. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and our lives intertwined in ways I had never anticipated. Birthdays, holidays, and quiet weekends were celebrated together, each moment infused with laughter, teasing, and the comforting presence of those who had become my family. One evening, as we sat together watching an old movie, Ethan leaned over, brushing his lips against mine. Mason rested his head against my shoulder, Luke entwined his hand with mine, and I realized that this moment, this life was everything I had ever wanted. We had navigated jealousy, insecurity, and societal expectations. We had confronted our fears and vulnerabilities. And in doing so, we had created a bond that was unbreakable, a love that was expansive, inclusive, and deeply human. It wasn't always easy. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But through it all, we chose each other every single day. And that choice, repeated, deliberate, and wholehearted, was what made our love extraordinary. One rainy afternoon, months after the initial confessions, we all found ourselves in the living room, laughing over a shared joke. The apartment, our sanctuary, was filled with warmth, light, and the unmistakable feeling of belonging. I looked at Ethan, Mason, and Luke, each one a reflection of the love, passion, and connection that had brought us together. "You know," I said, smiling, "I never thought living here would be like this." Ethan smirked, pulling me closer. "Neither did I, but I'm glad it is." Mason chuckled softly, leaning against me. "Me too," Luke, grinning mischievously, added. "And you can't get rid of us, no matter how hard you try." I laughed, heart full, knowing he was right. This chaotic, messy, perfect love was mine, ours. And it was worth everything, the uncertainty, the fear, the intensity, because it had led us here. Together, happy, and free to love without reservation. That night, as I lay between them, warmth radiating from every side, I felt a profound sense of peace. The apartment, once a simple living space, had become the heart of our La Visa, place where love, in all its complexity and beauty, could thrive. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of our breathing lull me to sleep, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely, irrevocably, and joyfully at home. We had found each other in the chaos, the laughter, and the quiet moments. We had chosen love, embraced vulnerability, and created a life that defied convention. And in doing so, we discovered the true meaning of happiness. Not perfection, not simplicity, but connection, trust, and the courage to love fully, without fear. In that small, sunlit apartment in Chicago, surrounded by 3 men who had become my everything, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Intense, messy, passionate, and unbreakable had found our home, our family, and our love. And that love, in all its glorious, complicated, beautiful entirety, was ours to keep forever. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.